Hello, Reddit-eyed plus here. You know that feeling, right? That moment when you're standing in a crowd, surrounded by people, yet you feel utterly alone, and you just look around and think, with a profound sense of disorientation, what the hell am I doing here? Yeah, that was me. Exactly me standing there, or rather sitting there, amidst the joyous chaos of my stepdaughter's wedding, a day I had poured my heart, soul, and a significant portion of my life savings into. It was a surreal, almost out-of-body experience. A slow, motion unraveling of everything I thought I understood about my place in her life. Let me give you some context, because without it, the sting might not land as heavily. My name is Mark, and I've been a constant, unwavering presence in Danielle's life for 15 years. Think about that time frame for a moment. 15 years. She was a bright-eyed, curious, and sometimes delightfully mischievous 8-year-old when I married her mother, Claire. 8 years old. At that tender age, she was just beginning to truly grasp the complexities of the world. And I stepped in, not as a replacement for a father, but as the father who was actually there. Her biological father, Tom, was, to put it mildly, a ghost, a whisper in the wind. A distant relative who occasionally, if the stars aligned and he remembered, might send a birthday card. Sometimes it would be late, sometimes it would be unsigned. Sometimes it wouldn't come at all. He was more of an abstract concept than a tangible parent. Meanwhile, I was the one who showed up, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, and financially. Parent-teacher conferences. That was me, sitting on those miniature chairs, discussing her progress in math or her latest artistic masterpiece. When she stumbled through her first crush and the inevitable, crushing heartbreak that followed. I was the one with the tissues, the comforting words, and the promise of ice cream. Learning to drive. You guessed it. Hours spent in the passenger seat. My foot hovering over the imaginary brake, my patience stretched thin but never broken, guiding her through parallel parking nightmares and freeway anxieties. I taught her how to change a tire, how to grill a steak, how to stand up for herself. I coached her soccer team, attended every school play, every concert, every single one of her graduations from elementary school to middle school. And yes, even high school, a significant milestone that Tom, predictably, couldn't be bothered to attend. He had a prior engagement, he said, which, knowing Tom, probably meant sleeping in. I was her anchor, her sounding board, her biggest cheerleader, her provider. She wasn't just Claire's daughter to me. She was my daughter. My heart, my responsibility, my joy. Or so I believed with every fiber of my being. So when Danielle got engaged to her fiancé, Alex, I was, to put it mildly, over the moon. Elated. Bursting with pride. It felt like another beautiful chapter in her life, one I was incredibly excited to be a part of. She even asked me to help plan the wedding. "Dad," she'd said, her eyes sparkling. "You're so organized, and you have such good taste. Will you help me with everything?" I'm certainly not a professional wedding planner, but I embraced the role with an enthusiasm that probably bordered on obsession. I went all in. We spent countless weekends scouring potential venues, from rustic barns to grand ballrooms. I tasted more obscure catering samples than I care to admit, deliberating over every menu choice, every appetizer, every dessert. We pored over countless floral arrangements, debated color palettes, and fretted over invitation designs. The works. Every single detail. I was there, offering advice, making calls, signing checks. And yes, I shelled out a good chunk of money too. Not because I was asked to, but because I wanted to. Because it was her dream. Her dream dress, a magnificent gown that must have cost a small fortune, shimmered with delicate beads and intricate lace. Custom invitations, engraved with elegant script, flew across the country to reach distant relatives. The flowers, oh, the flowers. They were flown in from who knows where, exotic blooms that smelled faintly of distant lands and extravagant budgets. I didn't think twice about it. Not for a second. Why would I? She's my daughter, I reasoned. My daughter, embarking on this beautiful new journey. It was an investment in her happiness, an expression of my boundless love. Or so I thought, with a naivety that, in retrospect, stings a little. Fast forward to the rehearsal dinner. The eve of the big day, and that's when things started to feel off. A subtle shift in the atmosphere, like a sudden drop in temperature you can't quite explain. The air felt heavy, almost charged with an unspoken tension. Danielle stood up to give her speech, a beautiful bride-to-be, radiant in a cream-colored dress. She thanked her bridesmaids, her new in-laws, her husband-to-be. She even thanked her dog. But when it came to her parents, a lump formed in my throat, a knot of anticipation. I braced myself for a mention, a simple thank you, an acknowledgement of the months of work I'd poured into this event, the years I'd poured into her. Instead, my name was conspicuously absent. Not a single thank you or acknowledgement. Not even a passing nod. It was like I was part of the furniture, a silent, invisible fixture. And then, she turned, her eyes shining with what appeared to be genuine gratitude, and went on about how incredibly grateful she was that her dad could make it. Tom, the man who couldn't even be bothered to show up to her high school graduation, let alone any other significant moment in her life. The man who was a phantom, suddenly materializing for the biggest show of them all. He sat there, preening under the spotlight, a smug, self-satisfied grin plastered across his face, soaking up the undeserved praise. My heart sank, a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I tried to rationalize it. I figured, okay, maybe I'm reading too much into this. The wedding's a big deal, she's stressed, overwhelmed, a million things on her mind. Whatever. Maybe she'll make it up on the actual day. Maybe it was an oversight, a momentary lapse. I tried to push the unsettling feeling down, to convince myself that my perception was flawed, that my emotions were overreacting. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it began to fester. But then the big day came, the actual wedding ceremony, and it all clicked into place with a sickening thud, a realization that hit me like a physical blow. The music started, the procession began, and I was sitting there, stiff and uncomfortable in my rented tuxedo in the second row, not walking her down the aisle. That honor, the most sacred and poignant moment of the entire day. The symbolic handover of a daughter from one man to another. That profound gesture of love and trust, it went to Tom, the man who had abandoned her, who had been a specter for all these years. And when I saw them together, walking slowly, deliberately, down that aisle, bathed in the soft, ethereal glow of the church lights, her beaming up at him like he was some hero who'd always been there, who had conquered dragons and saved kingdoms for her, my stomach lurched. I felt like I'd been punched squarely in the gut, the air knocked out of me. It wasn't just disappointment, it was a profound sense of betrayal. A cold, empty ache that spread through my chest. 15 years of dedication, reduced to an invisible presence, relegated to a spectator in the second row. The ceremony blurred into a haze. I tried to focus on Claire, on the beauty of the vows, but all I could feel was this growing emptiness. Then came the reception, the toasts, and again, a repeat performance of the rehearsal dinner. The bride and groom went on about how grateful they were for their parents, for the people who shaped them, supported them, made them who they are. They thanked the catering staff, the DJ, even the hotel manager. But there was no mention of me. None. Zero. It was as if I simply didn't exist in their narrative of parental gratitude. And there I was, sitting at a table near the back, amidst an assortment of distant relatives I barely knew, like some remote cousin who had wandered in by mistake. I was a guest, perhaps, but not a father. Certainly not her father. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. I had paid for this entire spectacle, facilitated its very existence, and yet I was a ghost in my own, carefully orchestrated illusion. You know what's funny about moments like that? At first, I didn't even feel anger. Not a burning rage, not a sudden outburst. Just a profound, chilling numbness. Like I was watching someone else's life play out on a screen. A dispassionate observer to a tragedy that wasn't my own. Every laugh around me, every clink of glasses, every celebratory cheer, it all seemed muffled, distant. I felt detached, floating above myself. A silent witness to my own erasure. But by the time the elaborate, multi-tiered wedding cake was wheeled out, a culinary masterpiece I had personally tasted and approved, the numbness began to recede, replaced by a slow, simmering, undeniable anger. It wasn't just the blatant snub, the public humiliation, the sheer lack of acknowledgement for all I had done. Today, it was the accumulated weight of 15 years. The years I'd spent giving, investing, being there for every scraped knee, every late night conversation, every triumph, every setback, the emotional labor, the financial sacrifices, the relentless showing up. And now, in the culmination of all that effort, at the very moment I should have felt most valued, most recognized, I was being treated like I was invisible, disposable, a convenient ATM to be accessed and then forgotten, a tool, a means to an end. The anger solidified into a quiet, cold resolve, a decision formed in my mind, clear and sharp. No grand scene, no dramatic confrontation, just a quiet, internal reordering of priorities. I knew what I had to do. As the first slice of cake was being cut, amidst the flash of cameras and the happy murmurs of the crowd, I made my move. Quietly, almost imperceptibly, I slipped out of my chair. No goodbyes, no excuses, no scene whatsoever. I simply melted into the background, a shadow among the celebrating guests. I walked calmly, purposefully, past the dance floor, past the beaming bride and groom, past Claire, who was chatting with some distant relatives near the bar. She didn't even notice me go. I reached the double doors of the ballroom, pushed them open, and stepped out into the cool night air. The sounds of the party faded behind me. I walked through the quiet hotel lobby, out into the parking lot, and got into my car. The engine rumbled to life, a low, comforting hum in the silence. I put the car in reverse, then drove away, leaving the shimmering lights and the hollow laughter behind. The drive home was silent, punctuated only by the hum of the tires on the asphalt. The house was dark and empty, a welcome sanctuary. I didn't turn on any lights, just sat in the quiet, the echoes of the day slowly fading, replaced by a growing sense of calm. A deep breath. It was done. The next morning, surprisingly early, I got a frantic call from Danielle. Her voice was tight with stress, a frantic edge that was completely unlike her usual composed demeanor. Apparently, there'd been some confusion about the final payments for the venue and vendors. A significant sum, I gathered, that she and Alex clearly hadn't anticipated or planned for. She wanted to know if I'd take care of it, as we'd discussed. My blood ran cold, then simmered with a quiet fury. Disgust, the sheer audacity of it, the transactional nature of her appeal, as if I were merely a financial resource, a walking wallet, always on call. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the silence stretch for a moment, letting her squirm just a little. Then I spoke, my voice calm, level, and devoid of any emotion I might have been feeling. Danielle, I said, I think you should ask your dad. Silence. Dead silence. The kind of silence that screams volumes, that hangs heavy in the air, pregnant with unspoken truths. I could almost hear her brain scrambling, trying to process my words. Then a stammered, almost childlike response. But he can't. The sheer helplessness in her voice, the sudden realization of Tom's true nature, was almost comical. Almost. Can't or won't? I asked, my voice still even unwavering. I didn't wait for an answer. I didn't need one. Her silence was her answer. The line went dead as I slowly, deliberately, pressed the end call button. Now I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm proud of how I handled it. Pride isn't the emotion that comes to mind. It wasn't about malice or revenge. It was about self-preservation. It was about drawing a line in the sand, a boundary I should have drawn years ago. I wasn't about to keep letting myself be taken for granted, to be used and discarded, to be an invisible ATM for her convenience. If I wasn't good enough to be recognized as her father, to walk her down the aisle, to be acknowledged in a single toast, to be a visible, honored part of her monumental day, then I sure as hell wasn't good enough to pay the bills for it either. The two roles, I realized, were inextricably linked in my mind. The emotional and the financial. She had clearly severed one. I was simply acknowledging the severance of the other. I haven't heard much from her directly since that phone call. Claire, my wife, Danielle's mother, wasn't exactly happy about it. She's a peacemaker by nature, always wanting to smooth things over. She didn't yell or scream, but the air around her was thick with disapproval. She paced, she sighed, she gave me those loaded glances. But she's been quiet too, remarkably so. I think deep down, she knows I had a point, a valid, undeniable grievance, even if she doesn't want to admit it out loud, even if it tears at her mother's heart to see the rift. She's caught in the middle, and I understand that. You'd think I'd feel guilty about it, right? Leaving like that, cutting her off at such a pivotal, emotional moment in her life. You'd think I'd be plagued by doubts, by the what-ifs and should-haves. And maybe, in an alternate universe, a version of me would have been. But here's the thing. When you've spent years, decades even, being the dependable one, the one who always shows up no matter what, the unwavering presence, the consistent pillar of support, you start to realize something profoundly important. Something heartbreaking, perhaps, but true. People, sometimes even the ones you love most, only truly appreciate you until they think they don't need you anymore. Until they find someone else, or something else, to fill that void. Until they realize you're not a bottomless well of resources, financial or emotional. I wasn't some anonymous ATM, a machine dispensing cash on demand. I was a dad, her dad. Or at least, I thought I was, with every fiber of my being. I had given her a lifetime of presence, and in return, I was offered an empty seat in the second row and a request for a payment. That, I decided, was a price too high to pay. The days after the wedding were quiet. Too quiet. The house, usually filled with the comfortable rhythm of our shared life, felt strangely hollow. Claire was walking on eggshells, tiptoeing around me. And I couldn't quite tell if it was because she was genuinely mad at me, or if she was upset with Danielle's behavior, or simply the unbearable tension that had settled between us. She didn't outright say anything condemning or accusatory. But every now and then, I'd catch her sighing a deep, weary exhalation that spoke volumes, or giving me that look, you know the one. The look that says, "We need to talk about this, but I don't know how to start. And I'm not sure I even want to." It was a silent, simmering acknowledgement of the elephant in the room. Then, about a week later, my phone rang again. It was Danielle. My heart gave a little jolt, a mixture of apprehension and a strange, almost defiant readiness. But this time, it wasn't an apology, oh no. That would have required a level of self-awareness and humility she clearly hadn't yet discovered. She wanted to clear the air. "Hey," she started, her voice unnervingly sweet, almost saccharine, as if nothing profound or hurtful had transpired. As if the entire wedding debacle was just a minor hiccup in an otherwise perfect relationship. "I've been meaning to talk to you about the wedding." "Huh? Huh?" I said, keeping my tone as neutral as possible, carefully guarding against any hint of emotion, any crack in my composure. I wanted to see where she was going with this, to hear her version of reality. "So," she continued, a slight hesitation in her voice. "I feel like there was some misunderstanding about, the payment stuff." I couldn't help it. A short, sharp laugh escaped me, a cynical, humorless sound. "A misunderstanding. Right. Danielle," I said, cutting her off before she could spin any more convenient fictions. my voice calm but laced with an undeniable edge of steel. Let me stop you right there. There was no misunderstanding. Not on my part, at least. You made it perfectly clear how you see me, how you value my role in your life. You wanted your biological dad, Tom, to have the spotlight. You wanted him to walk you down the aisle, to be glorified in your speeches, to stand there as your hero. Great. You got what you wanted. I paused, letting my words hang in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. But that spotlight, I continued, my voice gaining a quiet power, that adoration, that public acknowledgement, it comes with responsibilities, Danielle, and paying for the dream wedding you wanted. The one I invested so much in happens to be one of them. You chose your father for the honor. Let him choose the bills for the responsibility. She went silent for a moment, a stunned pause on her end. I could almost hear her processing my words, scrambling for a new angle, a new excuse. Then she tried to backpedal, her voice taking on a softer, more defensive tone. It's not like that, Dad. I just wanted to give him a chance to feel included. He's my dad, too. No, Danielle, I said, my voice steady, firm, and uncompromising. He's your biological father. There's a fundamental difference between the two, one you seem intent on ignoring. He contributed his DNA, perhaps, but I'm the one who raised you. I'm the one who changed your diapers, stayed up with you when you had the flu, taught you how to ride a bike, helped you with your homework, paid for your college tuition, showed up for every single event that mattered. I was the constant, the anchor. He was the guest star who showed up for the finale and took all the credit. And if you can't see that distinction, if you can't understand the depth of what I've given you versus what he has, then I honestly don't know what else to say to you. I could hear the frustration rising in her voice, a petulant, childish whine. She muttered something under her breath about me being petty and making it all about myself. Typical deflections when confronted with uncomfortable truths. That's when I realized, with a disheartening certainty, that there was no getting through to her in that moment. She wasn't ready to understand what she'd done, the depth of her ingratitude, the pain she had inflicted. She was still operating from a place of self-interest, not introspection. Look, I said, cutting her off before she could launch into a full-blown rant, my patience finally wearing thin. I truly hope you had the wedding of your dreams, Danielle. I really do. You wanted it, and you got it. But I'm done. I'm done being treated like a second thought, like an afterthought, like a convenient resource to be used and discarded. When you're ready to have an honest conversation about what happened, about what real family and real fatherhood entail, when you're ready to truly see me for who I am and what I've given you, you know where to find me. And then, for the second time, I hung up. The line went dead with a soft click, echoing the finality of my words. Claire was sitting across the living room, ostensibly reading a magazine, pretending not to listen to my side of the conversation. But I could see the tension etched into her face, the way her shoulders were hunched, the way her grip on the magazine was white-knuckled. She had heard every word. "Do you think that was a bit harsh?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes still fixed on the page, as if she were speaking to the abstract concept of justice, rather than to me. I looked at her, then out the window at the quiet street. "No," I said, my voice firm and clear, devoid of any doubt. "Because if I don't stand up for myself, Claire, who will? I've spent too much time, too many years, letting people take me for granted, letting them walk all over me, assume my endless availability and unconditional giving. It had to stop. And in that moment, I knew I had done the right thing for me. That was the last real, in-depth conversation I had with Danielle for months. The silence stretched, an emotional chasm opening between us. Claire, of course, kept in touch with her daughter, relaying messages, offering updates. And through her, I'd hear bits and pieces of Danielle's life. How she and her new husband, Alex, were struggling to make ends meet. The financial burden of the wedding having landed squarely on their shoulders, with Tom, predictably, having vanished back into the ether the moment the credit card statements started arriving. How Tom was back to his old ways, disappearing when they needed him most, always having an excuse, always prioritizing himself. He was no longer the hero who had walked her down the aisle. He was just Tom, the phantom father, inconvenient and unreliable. I didn't gloat. That's not who I am. I don't derive pleasure from other people's struggles, even if those people hurt me. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a tiny, almost imperceptible, part of me that felt a quiet, deep satisfaction, a sense of vindication. She wanted Tom to be her hero. She wanted to believe in the fairy tale, the idealized version of a father who only appeared when it was glamorous and convenient. And now, she was learning the hard way, through the harsh realities of life, that true heroes don't just show up for the grand entrance. They show up for the mundane, for the difficult, for the demanding. They show up when it's inconvenient. They show up when you're struggling. They show up day in and day out, even when there's no glory, no spotlight, no public adoration. Eventually, after several long months of silence, Danielle reached out again. This time her voice sounded different. Softer. Less defensive. There was a fragile quality to it, a subtle tremor that suggested vulnerability. Apologetic even, though she didn't use the word explicitly. "Hey," she said, her voice small, almost hesitant. "Can we talk? Really talk?" And for the first time in a very long time, I heard something in her voice I hadn't heard before. Something genuine. Humility. It was a faint spark, but it was there. And it was enough. I don't know where things will go from here. Rebuilding trust takes time. Rebuilding a relationship that has been fractured by years of neglect and a painful public slight isn't something that happens overnight or even in a few months. It's a slow, arduous process, one step forward, two steps back, often requiring patience and forgiveness from both sides. And I'm not in a rush. I'm not going to pretend that a single phone call or a newfound glimmer of humility erases 15 years of being taken for granted. But if there's one thing this whole messy, painful saga has taught me, if there's one undeniable lesson I've walked away with, it's this: knowing your worth, understanding your value, and refusing to settle for anything less than the respect and recognition you deserve isn't selfish. It's not petty. It's not an act of vengeance. It's absolutely, fundamentally, unequivocally necessary. It's self-respect. It's drawing the line. It's acknowledging your own existence in a world that might try to make you invisible. So, yeah, that's my story. The wedding wasn't mine to claim, not in the way she wanted it to be, but the lesson. The profound, life-altering lesson about boundaries and self-worth. That was sure as hell mine, and I plan to carry it with me always.